It began, as so many great cataclysms do, not with the deafening roar of massed artillery or the thunderous, earth-shaking march of legions, but with a deceptively quiet rustle, carried on the anodyne summer breeze and sealed within the unassuming folds of a simple printed piece of paper. This was no solemn treaty of peace, painstakingly negotiated over months in gilded halls, no fiery declaration of war broadcast with patriotic fervor from grand balconies, not even a desperate call to arms echoing across the sun-drenched fields of a threatened nation. No, this was merely a diplomatic missive, meticulously drafted, subtly menacing, its true purpose shrouded in bureaucratic language, delivered on the sweltering afternoon of July 23, 1914. Its recipient, the proud yet precariously independent Kingdom of Serbia. Its sender, the venerable, ancient, and increasingly anxious Austro-Hungarian Empire, an empire teetering on the brink of an uncertain future. A document that, when viewed through the chilling, unforgiving lens of history, now stands as perhaps the single most potent, the most destructive, and certainly the most profoundly consequential piece of correspondence ever penned in the entire bloody chronicle of human endeavor. Europe, in those simmering, claustrophobic summer days, was not merely a collection of sovereign nations on a map. It was a continent poised precariously on the very edge of an unimaginable abyss, a vast, volatile powder keg of long-simmering ambition, deep-seated resentment, and unyielding imperial pride. Its great powers, the sprawling empires of old, their crowns heavy with centuries of legacy, the burgeoning industrial republics, hungry for resources and influence, the colossal colonial giants, their reach spanning the globe, were bound together by a labyrinthine, almost suffocating web of secret alliances and mutual defense pacts. These intricate agreements, paradoxically designed to maintain a fragile balance, instead created an intricate trap, ensuring that a tremor in one corner would inevitably shake the foundations of all. Each ancient monarchy, each burgeoning industrial titan, eyed the other with a potent brew of suspicion, a gnawing ambition for dominance, and a barely concealed dread of the seemingly inevitable, all-consuming clash. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the ill-fated heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, in the distant sun-drenched streets of Sarajevo, had indeed provided the immediate, undeniable spark. But this was no mere isolated act of terror, no simple quest for justice, nor a straightforward act of retribution for a royal death, however tragic. Oh no, this was a meticulously calculated gambit, a deliberate, cold, and strategic maneuver by the architects of power in Vienna. It was a decision, forged in hushed rooms and behind heavily guarded doors, designed not to prevent war, but to exploit a tragedy, to leverage a moment of crisis into an unparalleled opportunity for imperial expansion, a chance to settle old scores, and to brutally redraw the map of the Balkans to their own advantage, even if it meant risking a continental conflagration. The demands contained in that infamous, fateful letter, known to history as the July Ultimatum, were not merely stringent, they were crafted with a chilling, almost surgical precision. Every clause, every line, every single word was engineered with an almost cynical brilliance to be, as the most astute historians would later confirm with grim certainty, as largely unacceptable to Serbia. Imagine, if you will, the scene in those palatial, yet tension-filled offices in Vienna. The austere diplomats, their faces etched with calculated resolve, the steely-eyed strategists, their minds cold and analytical, the hawkish generals, their uniforms stiff with martial pride. They were hunched over intricate maps of the contentious Balkans, poring over legal texts and ancient grievances, not seeking resolution or reconciliation, not striving to preserve a fragile peace, but rather intent on forging an ironclad, undeniable excuse for conflict. This was a deliberate challenge to Serbia's very sovereignty, a blatant, audacious infringement upon its hard-won independence, a perfectly constructed pretext for a conflict they believed was not only inevitable, given the volatile currents of the age, but one that they were utterly determined to shape, to control, and ultimately to win on their own terms, believing they held the reins of destiny itself. They sought not peace, but a perfect, unimpeachable justification for war. And so, the ultimatum arrived. A list of demands so sweeping in their scope, so profoundly intrusive in their nature, that for Serbia to accept them in full would have meant nothing less than the wholesale surrender of its hard-won independence, an utter abdication of its national identity, and its very right to exist as a sovereign nation among the powers of Europe. The world, seemingly poised on the cusp of an unknowable future, held its collective breath, its gaze fixed, however briefly, upon this small Balkan kingdom, a pawn in a game far larger than itself. Serbia, a smaller nation caught in the unforgiving crosshairs of colossal imperial ambition, found itself in an impossible bind, facing annihilation or humiliation. Yet, to the astonishment of many and the quiet fury of Vienna, it responded with a desperate pragmatism. They did not outright refuse, thereby plunging headlong into a hopeless, immediate struggle. Instead, with a last defiant gasp of sovereignty, they offered a partial rejection, a small, almost imperceptible crack in the facade of total compliance, a sliver of defiance, a refusal to fully bow. But it was enough. For Vienna, with its preordained agenda, this was the precise, long-awaited moment. This was the chosen trigger. The carefully planned casus belli had been laid bare, a meticulously constructed trap now sprung with brutal efficiency. This partial rejection, this final minute refusal to fully bow to every dictate, led directly, inexorably, to Austria-Hungary's swift and unyielding declaration of war against Serbia on July 28, 1914. And with that fateful, echoing declaration, the complex, interlocking gears of the European alliance system, a vast, intricate clockwork of treaties and commitments ostensibly built over decades to deter war, to create an equilibrium of power, instead began to grind into terrifying, irreversible motion. Like a meticulously arranged set of colossal dominoes, each one representing a nation, each one laden with the accumulated history, destiny, and millions of lives, falling in an accelerating, unstoppable cascade, what had begun as a seemingly localized dispute, a punitive measure for a single assassination in a distant land, rapidly, terrifyingly, catastrophically engulfed an entire continent in its destructive embrace. Nation after nation, bound by intricate, often secret pacts and long-standing rivalries, by honor and by fear, by perceived threats and by the momentum of militarism, were dragged one by one into the deepening, horrifying abyss of total war. The world was plunged into a global conflict of unprecedented scale, of unimaginable devastation, a maelstrom of steel and fire unlike any humanity had ever witnessed or could have conceived. It was a conflagration that would utterly and fundamentally reshape the entire 20th century, obliterating ancient empires that had stood for centuries, redrawing national boundaries in blood and ash, shattering the very fabric of society, and leaving an indelible scar on generations deep upon the human psyche. A stark, chilling, and agonizing reminder of how a single diplomatic move, a calculated provocation, seemingly minor in its initial form, can unleash forces so immense, so utterly destructive, that their echoes would reverberate not merely for years, but for generations, casting long, dark shadows across the entire span of the new century. All of this unfathomable tragedy, born from a piece of paper and the cold, deliberate, and ultimately self-destructive intent behind it.
Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and ring that bell for more history daily.